The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Demon Folklorist. I know it's been a little bit of a minute. I could not get anything done last month, and it had mostly to do with the fact that I was visiting my parents in Wyoming. I didn't have access to my microphone because I was supposed to be back a lot sooner, and then we found out that my car was all kinds of messed up, so my dad was working on it. But I'm back in Mexico now, and today we're going to be talking about Mexican supernatural, a topic that I'm learning more and more about as I live here. But today I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to talk about the psychic experiences I've had in Mexico, which are, in a word, weird. And then we're going to talk a little bit about curanderismo. Brujeria would be included in this episode, but I need to do a lot more research on it. So it's probably going to be a separate episode. First, we're going to be starting with a classic, wonderful story. It's one of my favorites, honestly. I love La Llorona. So it's such a widely known tale that it's hard to know where it began or even who these people were, if they were real people. That's how far this legend has progressed. So at some point in the distant past or so, a woman named Maria fell in love with a man who eventually abandoned her and her two sons. Some versions of the tale tell that it was actually a daughter, some tell it was one son, but normally it's told as two sons. And it was because her husband was unfaithful, I believe. Like, she fell deeply in love with him, she gave him children, and then he abandoned her, I believe, for another woman. In revenge, she drowned her two sons. In other versions, she killed them with a dagger, but she immediately regretted this, and there was nothing she could do. They were already gone. It was too late. So now she haunts rivers looking for them, wearing a tattered white dress. Possibly bridal, though it's hard to say. Maria exists now as a ghost of herself, only a weeping woman, forever doomed to mourn her children and to wander and to drown anybody who crosses her path. She sounds a lot like a Jewish Dybbuk. So this is a soul from Jewish folklore who has been punished and forced to wander, probably for sins committed on earth while they were alive, and they can do harm to people who are nearby. My husband's mom grew up in Mexico, and in the town where she lived, a girl had been brutally raped and murdered. The other people in the town witnessed the girl ascending to heaven. The girl was wailing as this happened. And then afterwards, La Llorona wailed for several nights. I mean, how eerie is that? Next, we have El Cucuy. So he's the boogeyman. And he's said to be a very small creature that fits the description of kind of like imp-like demons, with its small, distorted, very hairy shape. He is also said to have big ears, red eyes, and horrible teeth. He can appear as a large shadow in one's room. And the way you know he's been there is the scratches on your legs. To me, he sounds like a low-level demon, and apparently he also devours children, a lot like Krampus. So there's a lot going on here, and it mostly seems like this is a device to scare kids. But at the same time, I know from my work that demons do at times look like this, the lower-level ones. So it's like maybe it was sort of experiential, like somebody had an experience with El Cucuy, and then it informed the folklore around him of who he was. Or it's possible that people thought they were seeing El Cucuy because somebody had told a story, and then it then informed the experiences people were having. This in folklore is called the experiential source hypothesis, and then the cultural source hypothesis. So experiential is the one where you have the experience and then the folklore follows from there. Cultural source is when, like, the folklore that comes from the culture is informing the experiences. I often think culture is a little bit of both happening simultaneously because it's the only thing that really makes sense. I do think people are having experiences, but then the stories kind of grow from those experiences and they become secondhand, third hand, all the way until they become legends. So anyway, back to the stories. I'm sure that the reason y'all come here is because you want to hear me just sort of rattle on about whatever. That's pretty much how I run my podcast. This is just me talking and thinking out loud about the things, about stories and how they work. And you know if you've been here. Anyway, so we have This one was talked about a lot when I was a kid living in California. It's the goat sucker, a feaster of blood described as part canine, part reptile with long limbs. Anyone who crosses its path is in danger not only of exsanguination, but also of having their souls and or life force stolen in the night by this mysterious creature. Some say the chupacabra is a supernatural creature from elsewhere that has come to bring ruin upon our world. Other stories tell us he was born from dark magic rites or science gone wrong. Like the werewolf, the chupacabra comes out when the moon is full and night descends. So super creepy. I mean, there's a lot of exsanguination tales when you get into alien abductions. Like, there are tales of cows who have been drained of all their blood, but there are no cuts. Odd things like that. I wonder how much cultural crossover there is. Next story, this is kind of like a weird, just an anomalous, strange thing. In 1593, a soldier from Manila was suddenly transported to Mexico City. Like, he was in a fully different country in the Philippines. And then he was suddenly in Mexico City. And the soldiers there were like, who the hell are you? And he was like, what? Like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm here. And yeah, like he was jailed for being a servant of the devil. Somehow in the story, he was eventually kind of recognized and he was allowed to go home, thankfully, because he could have totally just been put in prison and stayed there. People get very scared. I personally think this might have been a portal or maybe a thinning of space and time. If you could hear that, that's Butters. He is yelling at Salem. The two have sort of gotten along. I mean, Salem grew up with a girl, with his sister, so he's not really used to playing all the time the way Butters wants to, so he ends up annoying him. And then there's a few kind of random stories of like lost gold and silver mines. Here's one that I like called the Naranjal mine. It's a lost gold mine in the Sierra Mountains. This one is near a river in a canyon, and it's near an abandoned hacienda. Surrounding it are these orange groves, and that's what the name of this mine means. Naranjal means orange grove. Actually, it being there gave it an orangey ore in the gold. Like, it actually changed the color of it. It may never have even existed, but the reason I like this one is all the little details, and it almost urges you to go look for it. Maybe it's sort of even like a mini El Dorado, the mythical lost city of gold. Not a supernatural tale, but oh well. Legends don't always need to be supernatural to be fun, and I figured most people hadn't really heard about that one. I personally think Mexican supernatural stories aren't really told enough, especially in the States. I mean, I'm sure they're told a lot more around here, but until I learn more Spanish and become more comfortable with the culture, I'm not going to know whether those stories are told. You know what I mean? Another one that I just found was interesting was the House of Laments, and it's a little like the La Laurie Mansion in New Orleans and the Winchester House in California mixed together. So this house is in Guanajuato. I'm probably going to butcher these names. Sorry, anybody of Mexican heritage. If I'm butchering these names, I'm doing my best, I promise. So it's built in the 18th century. Tadeo Fulgencia Mejia committed serial murders in this house from the 1890s to the early 1900s because he was trying to communicate with his wife, who had passed. I have no idea how serial murders fit into that, but it is now a spooky site you can actually go visit because it's a museum. It's said to be very, very haunted. And my reaction to that is I am unsurprised. But at the same time, the idea of people being murdered there and being trapped there, the idea of it, I hope it's not actually haunted. You know, that would make me really sad. But there is a lot of tragedy that is born of some of these stories. I think tragedy is seen, it's very much a fact of life, and yes, tragedy informs American stories as well, but there's something about it that's slightly different that I may not have hit on fully what it is yet, but I'll tell you when I know. All right, the Island of the Dolls. The legend goes that Julian, the previous owner, had found the body of a little girl and then heard whispers and experienced strange phenomena. He thought he heard the little girl asking for her doll back, so he covered this entire area in dolls of all kinds that he found. Now it's a spooky remembrance of a tragedy, and tourists actually leave dolls for her. Dolls at one point were thought to be vessels, though without life. They can't actually be inhabited. They're just hollow bodies. Otherwise, I mean, like, put it this way. I think demons would have been all over that. How freaked out would you be if your talkie Tina was coming after you? You know, like, they would have been so here for that. I do find places like this very interesting. These abandoned liminal spaces of dolls being everywhere. I mean, the uncanny valley of it alone is enough to send somebody into Nightmareville, you know? It's just so strange. I love the idea of this island because it's such a strange thing, and yet it's also built from something that is actually very kind. Although, again, it makes me sad to think that a child's spirit is still there. So one of my favorite Nancy Drew books ever was The Mysterious Mannequin. I love the idea that a mannequin could possibly be alive. And it also makes sense that my favorite Twilight Zone episode is about mannequins who come alive too. I think it's because of how impossible it seems and how uncanny mannequins actually are. It's our shape, but it doesn't quite look like us, and it makes us feel weird, some of them. Not all of them. Like the faceless ones, they're a little weird, but they're not. It's the ones with faces that weird us out, isn't it? And you gotta wonder why the fuck that is. Like, why on earth are we weirded out by things that look like us but aren't us? Anyway, somewhere in our evolution, we apparently came across that. Anyway, that's nightmare fuel. So there's a mannequin called La Pascualita in a dress shop in Chihuahua. People swear she is either a real person just posing or a live mannequin. The legend is that this is actually the shop owner's daughter. She died very young right before her wedding day, and then she was preserved as a mannequin for the shop so that her mom could keep her close by. It's also said that she wanders the shop at night, but oddly, brides seem to think that La Pascualita brings them luck. So, kind of odd how these things change over time and become almost like a good symbol instead of a tragic one. But this is very unlikely that this is a real thing. I don't know where this woman would have been able to go to get her daughter taxidermied, because that's way illegal. So, you know, probably not. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not super sure that that's a real thing you can do. I know it's possible with animals. Maybe it's possible with humans, but that doesn't seem like a thing that could be possible. I'm not sure. I worked in a funeral home for a little bit. I did not get involved in the embalming process because that is illegal for people who are not trained to do that, to be involved with that. So I have literally no idea. But let's just probably put that one to bed. I can almost guarantee this probably didn't happen. Most likely she's just a very real looking mannequin, but I would like to see her. I want to see how real she looks and why she's sort of like scary to the locals, and if a shiver runs up my spine, you know? I think I just like weird things too. Then there's another story. In 1951, people began to see a hitchhiker of a woman dressed in black with a veil on the road past midnight, especially on foggy nights, to take her to the cemetery, where she disappears through the gates. If they refuse to take her where she wants to go, she disappears in front of them. I love this story because Mexico has its own haunted hitchhiker story, except, you know, the woman in white type of thing, except this is a woman in black with a veil. I love that it's almost this mirror image of our story, of that particular story, although it's like the negative version, but not so negative because she doesn't actually hurt anybody. She just wants to go to the cemetery. It's just very interesting. Mexico has its own things going on, but at times they do blend with our stories because the border is just a human thing. It doesn't mean that there aren't the same things across the board. So then there's a creature called the Nahual. They're said to be sorcerers who shapeshift into an animal, much like the skinwalkers of Native American legends. They're said to kill livestock, drink blood, attack the unborn child within pregnant women, and spread disease while they roam the night, especially during new moons. So it's like right there, we see a really good example of that. This thing is clearly a skinwalker, but probably a little bit different as far as the cultural inventions that made them a skinwalker. And what I found to be really interesting is that Mexican lore fulfills the function mostly of getting children to behave with threats of these like creatures coming after them if they don't. And then we have updated versions of these same exact tales. There's not a huge break with tradition here. There's a lot more of preserving tradition with the same stories or the same cores of the stories, but with different people experiencing them. But who knows? Maybe these stories are almost in a replay. They replay here over and over and over again so that people will understand the same things exist here. Mexican folktales often deal in encounters with the devil. The tales are often strange of what like saints got up to while they were alive, the hubris of men and beasts. Me and my husband David actually had a really odd experience while we were coming out of Insidious the Red Door. So Mexican movie theaters only play the English version like for 3 days. So we went to go see Insidious the Red Door, and it was kind of a late showing. We were kind of having a bad day, and we just wanted to go see a movie, do something normal, have some fun. And he wanted this one to be the first movie that he saw in Mexico. So we went, and it was really good. I personally enjoyed Insidious 5. I thought it was a really good wrap-up for that entire series, which had its moments and its problematic content, but I thought as it went on, it got to the core of these stories, which is that people are the core and what we care about and what we love. And I really like that about the Insidious series. Even though it's about demons, what it's really about is us. Also, it's a very folklorically accurate film, so I really enjoyed that. So like I said, I enjoyed this movie. I wasn't scared by this movie because, let's just be honest, doing the work that I do, you don't really get scared by demons anymore because everything you see on there is not nearly as scary as the things that you happen to know about demons. So I think it would take a lot for a demon movie to actually spook me. Anyway, we were talking about it. I was telling him what I liked about it, and he was telling me what he liked about it. And at first we didn't notice the change. I was feeling like we need to go. We need to get to the car. We need to go now. And I couldn't identify where it was coming from. I was like, is this a human threat? Is this just like my evolutionary, stuff going on telling me that there is danger here? And it was like, no, it wasn't quite that. Because we weren't in danger, We were in a fairly empty parking lot. The other people were heading to their car too. Like, nothing was happening that would signal that, right? But while we drove, I felt it was spiritually unsafe for me to be out. That it was just not a good time to be outside. I don't normally feel like this. I've been out during the night in Mexico. So it's not just a like, oh, don't go out at night thing. It's a tangible feeling once you get closer and closer to midnight. That I get the feeling that midnight is when dangerous spirits are allowed to wander and that you need to be safe inside while they're wandering. And I don't know if that's true or not. It's just how I received that information. I actually saw something. I saw a woman walking very strangely, very stilted and stiff. Her hair hung matted in her face, and she walked very unnaturally fast. My husband saw the bushes kind of reach for our car as we drove by them, like maybe something was running alongside it. I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell whether either of these things are real or if it was our imagination, but when we got home, I did feel we were safe, but I still bound the house from spiritual entry just to be safe. That's how unsafe I felt. I mean, this is a country I don't know. You can't be too careful, but yeah, just keep it in mind that past midnight is a very dangerous time until the sun comes up. Just try not to be out around that time. But also keep in mind that I've never actually felt like I was in danger. Even at this point, I just felt it was getting unsafe, and it wasn't actually midnight yet. There's a lot of overblown fear when it comes to Mexico, and I haven't ever really felt truly threatened, except that one time that we were nearing a time when I would be unsafe. So, just keep that in mind, I guess, if you come here. But oddly, my story sounds a lot like the tale of Anima Sola, a woman spirit whose form is contorted, her hair is long and messy in her face. During the dead of night, she wanders, and she delivers a fate worse than death if you meet her. Anima Sola visits those who stray from righteousness. She can visit children who disobey, and they can awaken to scratches on their legs, which is really interesting because that came up in a El Cucuy narrative as well. She's bound to do penance forever, and to make others do so as well. Her form sounds weirdly right as far as what happened. Now, I could have totally blown something out of proportion. I could have seen something that just looked really odd. I'm trying to trust myself more, though. I think it was something else. Also, when this figure passed under the light, this is something I forgot in the original telling, she stayed dark even as she passed under the light. So that was very odd. And then we have the gloam. So this is going to sound insane, and I'm going to do my best to make it sound as not insane as I think it sounds. So the gloam is what I call this phenomenon. It's a term that I adapted from Silvia Moreno Garcia's book, Mexican Gothic. Spoilers, unfortunately, in order to be able to explain where I got the term, I have to tell you about the book. But it's revealed that there's a network of fungi that holds on to memories and prolongs life called the gloom. The gloam sounds more correct to me, even though gloam actually means like twilight or darkening. I don't know, the gloom doesn't sound quite right. But Tijuana's gloam is much stronger, much more noticeable. I didn't even have a word for it. I just knew that it was this dark bubble of memory. It held on to darkness of the things that had happened before. But it made me feel sick immediately every single time we drove through it. I dreaded going there. Everything's in Tijuana from where we're at, so it became a process of trying to protect myself against it. And at first, I didn't quite know what it was. I thought maybe I was just getting car sick, but it was all the time. But in Tijuana, it's very dark, sticky gloam of spiderwebbing memory throughout the city. It holds on to darkness and blocks out the light. The gloam of Rosarito, where we live, is a little different. It's making me sick, but it's so subtle, I didn't notice that that's what it was. It doesn't want me here, but it doesn't seem to be as sentient as Tijuana. Tijuana almost operates like a spirit, but not quite. Here in Rosarito, it's like an environmental thing, like a reaction to a pesticide from the plants. It's very strange, and I can't figure out exactly where it's coming from, except maybe the land. The gloam, to me, is like this jellified web of memory. It's like the land is calling out for nourishment of good and love, happiness. But I don't feel threatened by Baja California. It's more like it's just making me ill. I'm realizing just how much being a geomantic psychic affects me, and that it's not fun. It sucks. Sometimes, I love being psychic, I love being me, but it's just not always fun or easy when you don't know what's happening. So it's funny because it doesn't feel like Mexico itself is rejecting me. It's the gloam inside these certain areas. It doesn't like me here. It wants me to leave. It doesn't exist in this new area that we're going to be living in. And I think it's because nobody has lived there before. It's actually a completely new apartment in a completely new area that I think has been raised within the past few months. It feels spiritually clean. No spirit has ever actually passed through there, because my guess about spirits is that they tend to be drawn to the people, and if nobody lived there, why would a spirit be living there? You know what I mean? But that's just a personal theory. You don't have to take my word for it. yeah, there's very intense peace, tranquility, serenity there. I'm very much looking forward to moving there. Also, it's a completely new apartment. It's kind of small, but me and David don't really need anything super big. It's just me and him and our two babies, Butters and Salem. Wyoming actually is a little bit like this too with the gloam, but it's a different spiritual texture. It's from a bitterness in its core from how cold it gets, how downtrodden everyone becomes. I wouldn't even call it gloam exactly because it's coming from a different place. It's coming from that dead core. North Carolina's core was just angry and suspicious. It was an active core. This is not active because it feels like it's from memory. And truthfully, yes, I had read Mexican Gothic before I had come here. I'd probably read it a year ago, but I really wasn't actively thinking about it as I was driving through Tijuana. I think I remembered it, and then I started to read it again because I felt something was there. It's like these fun little synchronicities that lead me to where I'm going. Next, we are going to talk about curanderos and curanderas. This is called curanderismo. It is a practice of miracle workers who channel a higher power, usually God or saints. They're healers who use the land like herbs and such to help people along with energy work. My husband actually was born unable to walk. He had a crooked spine, and his mother took him to a curandero who straightened it out for him. So, I have a personal connection to curanderos, but I was also very struck by a book that had been assigned to us when I was about 11 or 12 in class called Bless Me Ultima, and she was a curandera in that book. So I think I've always been a little bit drawn to their lore. So the way that a curandero or a curandera works is on 3 levels. It's body, spirit, and mind. It's thought that disease is caused by all sorts of factors outside just the obvious. So social, environmental, emotional, physical, spiritual. When the spirit is sick, the body follows. I personally know this to be true because my body starts to feel ill when I neglect my spiritual side. And there are lots of botanicas here that sell these herbal supplies and all kinds of candles, really anything you can kind of think of. Also rosaries with different things on them, Santa Muerte, different crosses, that sort of thing. Brujeria is a type of magic specifically. So the difference really is curanderismo is more medicine, brujeria is magic. But it seems to be a lot more like gray and black magic from what I understand. Brujos and brujas are feared in Mexico. But it's interesting because they actually unhex people as well as hex them. So it's not a completely dark thing that they're doing here. They are performing public services that are helping people. So yeah, it's something that I'm going to have to look into a lot deeper. Everything I know about the occult is that magic, when it comes down to it, is up to the practitioner with how dark it gets. It's them who determines the level of that darkness or whether there's darkness at all. We all have darkness in us. I think everyone can be pushed to a place where darkness starts to bleed out of us. I know I definitely have it, and it's from, past hurt and shit that I've had to deal with in my life. But we do the best we can. I try to be kind. So we were in Tijuana because we were looking for something. I can't even remember what we were there for. I'm not really sure. But we were in downtown Tijuana where there's a bunch of really cool shops. And when I'm feeling okay, I can go down there. Or rather, when I do my own spiritual blocking of the energy, the gloam in Tijuana, there's really cool stuff to see, but I would actually recommend you go when it's cold because the amount of people there makes it so much worse. It's a very crowded area. If it was cold, you just almost like the body heat would be better type of thing. But we went on a very hot day and that was not a good idea. Actually, we went to the same area when I first got to Mexico day 1 and I felt very sick. So sick I was so happy once we had passed the town lines because it's weird. I can actually feel the shift of where the town believes it begins. If that makes any sense, I know that sounds crazy. Not really the town line exactly. It's actually maybe a mile before it actually says welcome to Tijuana, that sort of thing. But anyway, We went into this little shop and we had bought a few religious talismans that I believe in, and they activated them for us with a mix of blessed herbs, and there was a timer on it. She said, because I was having really bad luck, so I was asking for, some help with that as they were activating them. And it was funny because I had purchased a rosary and I had been wearing it, and then the cross was taken. Yeah, it's just not been good. So if you have any prayers or, good energy, whatever you believe in, send them my way, because things have been fucked. But things are getting better. It's just really slowly. Anyway, so she told us to wait only an hour and then to take these talismans out and to bury the garlic node that was in them. It was very important that we bury the garlic. And it's funny, I feel really safe wearing them. Right now I can't even actually wear them because I have a rash on my neck. It's just, a series of unfortunate events of things that have been happening in my life. But I have them in my pockets because I do feel very safe, especially when we're going around Mexico. It feels like the ultimate protection in an unfamiliar place, I suppose. I really want to learn a lot more about curanderismo the more we explore Mexico. And my husband actually has a couple in his family on his mom's side. So hopefully we can go visit his great uncle who had told my mother-in-law, oh yeah, no, she doesn't do anything evil. She just consults the spirits. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. I may have to do a part 2 to this episode because me and David are going to explore deeper into Mexico. Let me know what your experiences were in Mexico, if you had anything as spooky happen, and just be careful after midnight when you're here. Have a good day, you guys. See you later.